Heart-racing life or death escapes,
No, I'm not going back there. There is a murderer back there.
mind-bending plot twists and turns,
It's 74. 2074.
anxiety-inducing psychological thrills,
Zero!
thought-provoking pseudoscience,
Never mind, don't answer that.
an elaborately interwoven cast,
When?
9 years ago.
Where?
a mission to save the world
Not just these 6.
with 6 billion lives on the line.
Soon, I will have killed 6 billion people.
And
Funya Rimpa.
the Zero Escape series had it all. 9 Hours, 9 Person, 9 Doors, and Virtue's Last Reward are individually fantastic, but collectively a masterpiece. Together, they compose 2/3 of the Zero Escape trilogy, a series of connected visual novels that was unmatched by its peers. The unexpected success of Zero Escape in the West was a defining moment for visual novels, as it brought in much needed attention to the neglected and niche video game genre. All that was missing was the third and final game, Zero Time Dilemma, to complete the trilogy and establish Zero Escape as the GOAT. With 2 incredible predecessors, unprecedented levels of hype, and enormous support from a loyal fanbase, the stage was set for Zero Time Dilemma to rise up to the challenge. But when Zero Time Dilemma finally entered the spotlight, all that love quickly turned into bitter resentment and frustration.
Life is simply unfair. Don't you think?
The highly anticipated finale came to be an utter disappointment, and the Zero Escape series couldn't have fallen from the heavens fast enough. So, how did the Zero Time Dilemma single-handedly crush the hopes and dreams of the fanbase responsible for bringing it into existence? And why do I, 7 years after its release, still wish Zero Time Dilemma was different? Let's find out. This video will spoil the major plot points and twists of all 3 Zero Escape games. If you're unfamiliar with the series, I'd strongly recommend giving it a chance before continuing with this video. Now, with the formalities out of the way, let's look at what made the Zero Escape series so incredible to begin with. It all started with 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, known as 999. 999 is a visual novel that follows 9 strangers who have mysteriously awoken on a sinking ship. They're informed by their masked kidnapper, Zero, that they have 9 hours to escape through the hidden door number 9 before they drown to their deaths. Sounds simple enough? Not quite. The game's elaborate mix of mystery, suspense, science fiction, mind-blowing plot twists, and a charming cast delivered a one-of-a-kind, unforgettable gaming experience.
I might get wet.
What I love the most about 999's story was its ability to push the boundaries and tackle the concept of time paradoxes and time loops in a way that was incredibly unique and unlike anything I'd ever come across prior. The story of 999 is one that breaks both the player's heart and mind and leaves them utterly speechless.
We're going to burn to death together. What?
It left such a curiosity in the fanbase that the localizers, Axis Games, sat the writer of the game down, Kotaro Uchikoshi, for a lengthy 74-question Q&A, a habit that would continue following the release of its sequel, Virtue's Last Reward. While 999's ending was left open for a sequel, its story was self-contained. However, its commercial success outside of Japan exceeded expectations. Then, to the delight of fans, 999's sequel released roughly 2 years later. Unlike 999, however, its sequel would quickly do away with its self-contained story and instead create an overwhelmingly elaborate, intricate, and high-stakes story. Virtue's Last Reward, known as VLR, is quite unlike 999 in that it was made for a sequel to follow, establishing the Zero Escape series as a trilogy. VLR starts with the same premise of 999. 9 strangers have been kidnapped by a mysterious Zero and they awaken in an abandoned warehouse. However, this time the strangers have to either ally or betray each other in a series of prisoner dilemma-themed ambidex games to accumulate the 9 bracelet points needed to escape. Initially, the only clue players are given that VLR follows the story of 999 is that Clover makes a reappearance. While she physically seems to have aged, her outfit has time traveled back a few thousand years. But by its ending, it's crystal clear how VLR elaborately interwove 999's characters, plot and history with its own to set up an overarching plot with immeasurable consequences.
Soon, I will have killed 6 billion people.
As my favourite of the series, words cannot describe the incredible payoff VLR delivers after the mysteries surrounding the story are slowly unfolded, leading to a phenomenal cliffhanger of an ending.
Only you can save the world.
Although 999 and VLR took very different approaches in what they set out to achieve, collectively they created the foundation and momentum needed for the Zero Escape trilogy to be perfection. The loyal and passionate fanbase would then spend the next 2 years waiting with bated breath for any news that would shine a light on when they might see Zero Escape 3. Then, the day that broke the fanbase arrived.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry. I don't have any news to read.
2 years after VLR's release in Japan, Uchikoshi took to Twitter to announce that he failed to convince management to give Zero Escape 3 the green light. The game was on an indefinite hiatus. Despite the series' popularity in the West, poor sales in Japan led to a lack of confidence that Zero Escape 3 would be profitable. Not all hope was lost though, with Uchikoshi urging fans to continue to show their support for the series in the hopes that something would change. And fans did just that. Most notable was the rise of Operation Bluebird, a global fan-led campaign with the sole purpose of making Zero Escape 3 a reality. Now, I wanted to share this history for 2 important reasons. The first is that Operation Bluebird highlighted just how cherished the Zero Escape series was, and the impact it had on the fanbase. The second reason being that I firmly believe the hiatus and the circumstances of Zero Escape 3 ultimately led to its demise, which I'll touch on later. But for now, let's focus on what happened next. A year after the announcement of the hiatus came For Infinity, a ray of hope taking the form of a mysterious and continually evolving teaser website from Axis Games. Then, at the Anime Expo panel a few months later, a miracle happened. Zero Escape 3 was announced. And on June 28, 2016, almost 4 years after VLR had released in English, Zero Time Dilemma, known as ZTD, finally came into existence. With the launch of the game came critical acclaim and praise from professional reviewers, citing ZTD as a masterpiece that provides perfect closure, calling it the enthralling conclusion this Zero Escape trilogy deserves. However, fans, including myself, felt a little differently. What had caused this divide between fans and critics? And how did Uchikoshi manage to disappoint the fanbase that brought ZTD to life? Let's break it down. The story of ZTD is broken down into fragments. Each fragment covers 90 minutes of in-game time of a specific team of characters, and usually consists of a narrative section, an escape room puzzle, and then a decision game. After each fragment, the team is put to sleep and lose their memory of what's just occurred.
Pleasant dreams.
As you progress and witness the different outcomes to each decision game, more fragments become available to choose from. The game is designed to intentionally guide players to play fragments out of chronological order. It creates a non-linear way to experience the game's story, as the player jumps around different timelines and teams. Neither the player or the characters know what events have led to what they're experiencing.
Where's Vi?
I don't see her.
Initially, this method of storytelling appears to be conceptually unique and exciting, but in practice, it's quite clunky and jarring. It diminished the story ZTD tried to deliver. Firstly, most fragments begin with the same generic formula of characters waking up, checking the time, calculating how long they've been asleep for, and noting this might not be the first time they've awoken since the 1330 vote.
We could have woken up a bunch of times during all that.
This weakness lingers around any time a team learns that another team has died, linking it back to the 1330 vote, which in itself is problematic as fragments are available to the player when the decisions to lead there have yet to be made. This extends beyond the player, where the leaders of each team also vaguely remember events the player has yet to experience. Playing fragments at random across multiple timelines is confusing enough as it is. This just adds another layer of confusion to the mix. This prohibits the player from being able to attempt to link the fragments to one another. It creates a disjointed experience where it becomes easier to disconnect from the story. rather than to appreciate what actions and situations have led to what is being played. Finally, depending on the player's luck, the transitions between fragments can be jarring. There's nothing quite like witnessing D-Team be slowly killed off, one by a mysterious killer, to C-Team talking about nipple sizes.
Some, not uniformly, nipple sizes differ.
Look, and although it's just one example, ZTD is filled with these experiences. As the end of one fragment nears and the plot starts to get exciting, it comes to a quick end. The player is then moved on to the next fragment, where the characters wake up confused and oblivious, and the cycle repeats. Any momentum built up from each of the fragments is lost, and the player has no time to relish in the suspense and thrill. The disjointed storytelling diminishes the momentum, mystery, and enjoyment of experiencing the narrative unfold. Unsurprisingly, ZTD's story peaks towards the end when the traditional fragmented experience is replaced with linear storytelling. Although still in fragments, being able to experience gameplay segments that directly continue from the previous fragment allows momentum to build and connects the player to the story. A standout example of this is when C-Team learn that they all have the ability to shift, and they jump to different timelines in an attempt to escape the shelter. Watching C-Team's repeated attempts to escape death on the spot is enjoyable and thrilling. It's also through this that the player learns the information needed to advance the story towards its conclusion, providing a sense of purpose to what's experienced.
Together with me, we are 10.
Now, no fragment is complete without its decision game, the other core component of both ZTD's story and gameplay. Decisions are not a new concept to the series. In 999, by choosing which doors to go through, the player impacts how the rest of the story unfolds. As a result of those decisions, the player learns more about the characters they're working with, and the mystery of the nonary game starts to reveal itself. In VLR, the player chooses to either ally or betray their peers in the Epidex game, taking place after each escape room. Similar to 999, those decisions set the player embarking on a different timeline, altering the story delivered and the ending received. Both 999 and VLR executed this concept flawlessly. Decisions were scarce and equally spread throughout the narrative. This created a sense of importance each time a decision needed to be made, and the consequences of those choices wouldn't be apparent for quite some time. This continued a continued sense of momentum and mystery as the player patiently awaits to see what happens next. The subtlety and uniqueness of decisions guiding the story that is present in its predecessors is lost on ZTD.
The choice is yours.
In most of ZTD's fragments, a situation will arise where each team's leader is forced to make a decision. Decisions occur more frequently, and the situations surrounding most decisions are unique. On a positive note, this leads to some of ZTD's tensest moments where the player is forced to make a difficult choice, like choosing between letting fire burn in an incinerator or taking a chance on Sigma's life, or choosing between the gorgeous Mira or the abusive Eric to shoot with an arrow. Just kidding, that's an easy one. But on the other hand, the game can be completed in under 20 hours. There is simply not enough content to make the situation and outcome of each decision game unique. More often than not, the player is presented with an obvious right and wrong choice to be made. Going against the most obvious one will often quickly result in a bad ending, with nothing of worth revealed to the player. Even when the right choice is made, the consequences of each decision are short-lived because of the fragmented gameplay style. The emotional impact is quickly lost on the player as they move on to the next unrelated fragment. It doesn't help either that because fragments end so quickly following the decision, nothing stops the player from making the alternate decision to see the other outcome. If anything, this is encouraged to unlock fragments. Seeing both outcomes to a decision so quickly makes the consequences of both relatively meaningless.
Why? It's just how the pieces fall.
Finally, to emphasize the drama of the decision games, the non-leading characters of C and D team were written so that one represented the good angel and the other a bad angel when it came to influencing the leader's decision. This writing didn't have the intended effect of making each decision a difficult one. Instead, it conflicted with the character's nature and led to some truly idiotic moments.
1 year, and you've changed so much.
Here's Sigma abusing Diana to press the blue button with the "do not press" warning flashing. This would be understandable if, perhaps, pressing the button may have led to an escape of an impending demise, but there was no real threat other than shortly being put to sleep in the room they've awoken in. Or Junpei taking any chance to convince Carlos to sacrifice the other teams in order to obtain some X-passes. However, he sure doesn't seem to feel this way when he mourns the lives of those lost in other fragments. The worst offender of them all is when D-Team are on the floor writhing around in pain after learning they've been poisoned by Zero. Gab, a ray of hope, arrives with 3 antidotes and a note from Akane. While the most obvious choice for Diana, the nurse, would be to drink it straight away, Vi has something to say.
They might be poison.
As if all 3 of them aren't already dying. And this leads to my next problem with the game's writing. Both in the decision games and out, characters have been written to be inconsistent with their own writing, one-dimensional, and lacking any depth.
But why?
Because I grew up.
The perfect example of this inconsistency is Akane Kuroshiki. 999 and VLR did a fantastic job at portraying Akane as a cold-hearted genius who pulls all the strings. She does whatever needs to be done to achieve her goals. Which, in certain fragments of ZTD, this is exactly who she is. Here, she doesn't hesitate to sacrifice the lives of D-Team to create the danger needed for C-Team to shift. This Akane, the one who prioritizes her objectives and treats the rest as collateral damage, is exactly what fans have come to expect. Sadly, these moments are few and far in between.
I do what I must to accomplish my goals.
Instead, she's often the naive girl who cannot seem to comprehend why her love interest is distant. Must definitely not be because she ghosted him immediately after forcing him to play a traumatizing nonary game she constructed to save her own life. A painful example of her obliviousness is when she discovers her lover has been dismembered. Instead of assuming the killer might be Zero, or literally anyone else, she quickly sets the blame on Carlos, leading to an amusing chainsaw chase.
So, I'm going to be the next one you kill, huh?
Should Carlos die, her rationality sets back in as she starts to mourn him. Where was that thought 10 seconds ago? Akane's actions throughout this scene are unlike how she's ever been portrayed throughout the series. Even Eric, yes, Eric, held himself back from blasting Sean with his trusty shotgun when he came across his deceased lover. While the writing of the rest of the cast isn't as bad, most of the others lack complexity and development.
Got no time for a love life.
They have been written with a single characteristic in mind, and this drives their personality for most of the game. Let's examine Junpei. Junpei's experienced his fair share of trauma, which understandably has made him bitter. Unfortunately, this is all he is for most of the game. Most of Z-Team's fragments are plagued with his bitter remarks, edginess, or his excitement for the chance to eliminate other teams. It's jarring, annoying, and conflicts with his personality from 999. It isn't until much later in the game that he starts to show any sign of his caring nature and intellect. Most of the characters introduced in ZTD not only suffer the same fate, they also lack purpose and connection to the overarching plot. Carlos is the perfect hero with a noble mission to save his sister, but not much more. His only contribution to the true objective of the nonary game is being able to shift, which even Akane admits is not as unique an ability as it used to be. Mira is cold-hearted, emotionless, and not bothered by much, which is fitting for a serial killer.
How incredible is that?
However, like the piranha in the koi fish tank analogy, she was meant to be the dangerous element to the nonary game. But outside one timeline where she goes on her rampage, the only one she's dangerous to are the others in Q Team, all of who cannot shift and do not benefit from dangerous situations. She fails to live up to the purpose she was given and contributes nothing more to the wider story.
The plot thickens.
As for Eric, I actually found Eric to be a great portrayal of someone suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Sadly again, Eric portrays this a little too well, and his character doesn't extend beyond either being an obsessive boyfriend or a panic psycho.
Shut the hell up, you brat!
Similar to Mira, he cannot shift, and his importance to the story is questionable. Throughout the game, these characters don't express any dialogue that falls outside the stereotype they are bound to. Their lack of meaningful dialogue and purpose in the overarching story makes them kinda forgettable. This is the polar opposite of both 999 and VLR, where other than Quark, every single participant of the nonary game had a connection to the events of their respective games. Whether they knew it or not, they were chosen specifically to participate, and their histories were interconnected with one another. There was definitely an attempt to achieve this, with Mira taking the life of Eric's mother, snowballing into the death of Akane's parents and Sean. This connection is slowly built up over the course of the game.
Because there was a snail.
Problem is, the subplot doesn't go anywhere. It's cleverly revealed to the player, but doesn't seem to register with the characters. No other character even acknowledges Mira as the Heart Ripper outside of some character files that follow the ending.
So, what's the big deal?
Now, what happens when you focus on a small group of characters? Write them to have great chemistry with one another, link their backstories and their futures, and put them through emotionally challenging situations which force them to expose their true thoughts and inner demons. Well, that's simple. You get D-Team. To keep it short, D-Team's fragments were the highlight of ZTD. Throughout the game, Diana gets the chance to express a wide range of emotions, thoughts, character strengths, and weaknesses. It makes her relatable, likable, and allows the player to build a strong connection.
Please. Kill me.
And although Phi and Sigma are not new to the series, their backstories continue to expand within ZTD. Most importantly, all three of their character arcs are intertwined with one another and are crucial to the game's overarching story.
Phi, I'd like to name our daughter after her.
Sean is similar. Despite being an amnesiac robot and Eric's punching bag,
Damn, brat! Stop bullshitting me!
he expresses more emotions than his peers.
I want to know the truth.
He's also deeply connected to the game's mystery and receives more development than the others as a result. Had C-Team and Q-Team been written with the same level of love and detail as D-Team, all three teams could have shown. Instead, D-Team carried most of the game. Enough about the characters though, and now onto what fans love most about Zero Escape. Its crazy plot twists. Uchikoshi is known for utilizing a game structure to cleverly bake in mind-breaking plot twists that are at the core of the mysteries he writes. In 999, the two-screen system of the Nintendo DS was used in a very clever way. The narration throughout the game, which was present on the bottom screen, was not that of the protagonists. Instead, it was Chada Kane's narration of what she was witnessing through Junpei's eyes. Something she needed to do in order to save her own life. It cleverly plays right into the game's core twist. VLR doesn't fall far behind. Playing as a voiceless protagonist is not unusual among Japanese video games, and most players wouldn't think twice about it. This ignorance is turned against the player when it's revealed the protagonist isn't exactly who they thought. When the truth around the protagonist's identity is revealed, all the pieces start to fall into place.
It's your face, Dr. Sigma Climb.
Both of these plot twists are so effective because although the concepts around them, such as time travel paradoxes and shifting consciousnesses between timelines, are quite complex, the plot twists are baked into the respective games so seamlessly. This is thanks to Uchikoshi's unique writing style, which allows the player to not challenge what they believe they know. Equally, both plot twists are a surprise not only to the player, but also to the protagonist. The twists are also at the core of the greater mysteries that shroud both games. However, this concept is lost on Zero Time Dilemma. First, let's discuss the twist that instead of all three teams being split into different wards, they've been in the same ward the entire time. While the concept of this is clever, the reveal and the impact is anything but. The twist lacks simplicity, doesn't achieve anything worthwhile, and required too much to work. Firstly, the entire shelter had to be covered in glass TV screens that altered the layout of the shelter in an attempt to isolate each team to certain rooms, creating the deception of multiple wards. Next, the time on each team's watch were altered, deceiving the player into believing the teams were awake simultaneously. Then, to prevent the characters from running into each other's sleepless bodies, Shaun robots were used to collect and store each team bodies in a pod on a rotating schedule. And all of this for what exactly? To make you feel like an absolute jerk for pressing the button in the decontamination room.
I don't know why I pushed the button.
Seriously, it was really only used to create an opportunity for each team to get together at the end. However, this could have easily been achieved another way. Secret tunnels or doors connecting the wards would have equally been as effective. The only time the single ward trick had any relevance to the story, outside of the ending, is where Mira goes on a murder spree in one of the timelines. Because this scene can be accessed quite early on in the game, it can leave the player wondering how the robed killer, likely to be Mira, was able to get into Ward D. But again, this required yet another setup. To make it work, it was written in that Mira was exempt from the drug injections. Outside of it being an early indicator of the twist, the scene didn't really add anything to the overall story, other than yet another bad ending. I could also mention how Mira apparently used the ward trick to murder and dismember Junpei for no apparent reason in another timeline, but that whole plot point truly makes no sense to me. Overall, the twist required too much for what it delivered. This is unfortunately equally applicable to the game's next big plot twist. The biggest mystery of each nonary game is attempting to figure out Zero's identity. After countless hours of miserable deaths and cruel decision games, Zero's identity is finally revealed. Zero is none other than Q. No, not the robot you thought was Q. That's Shaun, who was only ever called that after you discover who Q really is.
You, Delta!
And be prepared to have your mind blown, because Q is actually the supposed blind, deaf, and paraplegic old man named Delta, who has been with Q Team the entire time, just off screen. Surely it should shock the player that a character they had no idea about doesn't actually have any of the disabilities the characters thought, and instead is the true mastermind.
I thought you were supposed to be deaf.
Look, now I'll be a little nice. The twist didn't come completely out of nowhere. There is foreshadowing sprinkled throughout the game, such as the fourth shadow you can often see in Q Team's fragments. Q and his disability are also referenced throughout the occasional character dialogue. And while Shaun is a complete stranger to Eric and Mira,
someone's one-night mistake?
A mistake?
Maybe Diana's.
It's made apparent to the player that there were 9 participants at the decom facility. But it has been 7 years since I first played ZTD, and this plot twist still leaves an awful taste in my mouth. First, again, is the setup required to make this work. Is the player meant to believe that not a single character ever thought to suspect that the paraplegic, blind, deaf, chair-bound old man could have possibly been pretending? That every single time they pondered Zero's identity, the thought that it could be Q never crossed their mind.
Do you guys know who Zero is?
That not even Akane, the cold-hearted genius, or Sigma, a creative intellectual artificial intelligence, pondered the thought? This is made even worse right before Zero's reveal, where Eric is suspicious of everyone other than Q for Mira's death. Now, the easy answer is that a timeline where a character did suspect Q as Zero is not present in the game, but that's an unsatisfying answer. Instead, the player is left to believe that all the characters they've grown to love are just complete idiots. Now, for the purpose of the twist, which, to be honest, I honestly can't think of. Zero is completely off-screen, never directly mentioned, and does nothing other than sit in complete silence while observing the others through his glasses. This situation to me is identical to if Zero simply wasn't there. Nothing is added to ZTD's story as a result of this twist. It is simply a fact that is revealed to the players. Similar to the single ward plot twist, the setup required for what was delivered was a wasted effort. There could have been an attempt to incorporate this mysterious 10th player as an essential element of the nonary game, akin to how Danganronpa handled something similar.
The 16th student, lying hidden somewhere in this school.
But whether Zero was present or not throughout the game would have made absolutely no difference to the way the story unfolded. Calling the journey through Zero Time's dilemma emotionally draining is an understatement. There's just something uncomfortable about being forced to repeatedly witness cruel and gruesome deaths of the cast. It's made worse as the player learns the noble reasons most of the cast are there, like saving the world, reconnecting with their childhood love, or to raise the money to help their hospital-bound little sister. It parallels the real world nicely, where bad things happen to good people.
Life is simply infernal. Don't you think?
So surely being forced to witness all that hardship was worth it, right? Not quite. On a positive, and reminiscent of 999, the concept that Delta had to facilitate this nonary game to allow himself and Phi to be born is interesting. It incorporates the bootstrap paradox and pushes the boundaries of storytelling in a way that is so unique to the Zero Escape series and Uchikoshi's writing.
Mom.
But sadly, that is the extent of where the ending shines. And players have Delta and his complex motives to thank.
I already told you. My motives are complex.
Stop bullshitting me!
The nonary game also had to happen to prevent a future where all of humanity went extinct because of a religious fanatic starting a nuclear war. Who is this religious fanatic? No one knows, not even Delta. However, if Radical 6 escapes the shelter and 75% of humanity is wiped out, this fanatic is among the casualties. Delta took these odds when he created Radical 6, and his bet paid off. As seen in VLR, the lives of 2 billion people were saved. The alternative is that the cast makes it out of the shelter unscathed, like the ending, and there's now 6 trained shifters who are motivated to stop this religious fanatic without Radical 6.
I'm sure I told you in another history that my motives are complex.
Now, I have 2 major problems with this. Delta is a man with resources and talent. He can read minds and control people's actions. He's got a giant quantum computer that can process the histories and futures of multiple timelines simultaneously. He's got an alien transporter that allows him to duplicate himself into other timelines. And he's the leader of Free the Soul, a well-funded cult capable of cloning humans.
But it was I, Dio!
Knowing all this takes the realism out of the ending. Is the player meant to believe that Delta had to choose between Radical 6 or motivating 6 shifters to stop this fanatic? That, even with all his resources, he couldn't find another way to prevent mankind's extinction?
I guess you could say I killed them.
Now, Delta could be lying, and he could have a secret ulterior motive. The problem is that ZTD is the final game of the trilogy, and the end of the Zero Escape story. There is nothing more out there for fans to learn about to come to a conclusive answer.
Life is unfair.
The next issue is the shift from the villain being the bad guy to the good guy, something that's unfortunately becoming more common in video games. VLR quite clearly establishes Free the Soul as an evil cult responsible for mass genocide to achieve a new world order. By linking them to not only the events of VLR, but to the first nonary game that precedes the events of 999, VLR clearly establishes Free the Soul as an overarching villain to the series. Their crimes were the cause of the tragedies that befell a lot of the characters fans have come to love. So by the time the credits start rolling in VLR, there is no doubt in the player's mind that the cult and its leader brother will be the main villain in Zero Escape 3. ZTD backtracks on this. Outside of the ending, the notorious cult are only referenced in the ending that leads to VLR. While it's made clear that Delta is indeed brother, the leader of Free the Soul, he's no longer painted as an evil mastermind. Instead, Delta has self-justified all the crimes he's committed as a needed means to saving at least some of humanity, even if that means wiping out 3/4 of mankind. And the ending ends there, with no more justification provided. As Delta suffers from incredibly short screen time, there isn't enough time to question his intentions. Nor is there any time to build any emotional connection or empathy. Instead, players are left to bitterly accept his nobility at face value and accept that the series villain is a good guy. It's a significant change from 999 and VLR, where the main antagonists are merciless psychopaths with insidious intents. Truthfully, it feels like the ending was written this way as the easiest way to end the series on a tight budget with limited development time, making Zero Time Dilemma a very fitting title.
Does that make you angry?
What this leaves us with is an overwhelmingly disappointing ending. It's a hard pill to swallow to accept that everything the player has achieved over the course of 3 games was exactly as Delta intended. All to create a timeline where there's hope against an invisible threat that's only introduced at the end of the series. The ending robs the player of any satisfaction of bringing down a villain and carving out a hopeful future from their own actions and struggles. What hurts the most as a die-hard Zero Escape fan isn't the character inconsistencies or the pointless plot twists. It's the incomplete plot threads and character arcs from the series. And it's through what is unresolved that it's evident that ZTD is not the final game of the trilogy that Uchikoshi had intended when VLR was written. 999 is free from blame. As a self-contained story with a satisfying ending, it didn't promise to deliver any additional closure. VLR, on the other hand, is not so innocent. VLR opened Pandora's box by involving, either directly or indirectly, most of 999's cast into the wider story. Uchikoshi escalated this problem in VLR's Q&A by promising closure. What happened to Snake? Where is Aoi? What happened to the rest of the 999 cast? What's going on with Ace? However, all these promises were retconned into a 2-minute dialogue between Junpei and Akane. No appearances, no other references, just a single dialogue to cover it off. Now, onto VLR's plot threads and characters. Did Alice and Clover ever find a way to send their VLR bodies and consciousnesses back into a time where they aren't stuck 45 years into the future of a Radical 6 plague timeline?
Schrodinger's cat.
We'll never know. Where was Kyle in ZTD? Don't know. Who was the mysterious question mark that Akane spoke to in VLR's Another Time ending? Was it the player? And was it the player's actions that led to Diana and Carlos pressing the button in the decontamination room? Or was it Delta's mind hacking? Or parasites? That's anybody's guess. Now, I do acknowledge that Uchikoshi took to Twitter to announce the Another Time ending in VLR was non-canon. However, this came after ZTD's release, after fans started asking questions, so I have trouble believing it. Regardless, ZTD wrote off all of VLR by shoving everything leading to its events into a bad timeline that sits outside the main ending. It retconned out all of the beloved characters and outstanding plot threads. I probably wouldn't be so offended by this if VLR wasn't my favourite from the series, but damn, it hurts. Finally, for some unknown reason, ZTD fails to complete its own character arcs. Following the end of ZTD, epilogue files on ZTD's cast are released. Carlos's little sister recovers from the Reverie syndrome. Akane and Junpei are engaged. Nira's in prison, Eric's still madly in love with her, and Sean busts Mira out of prison to help her set the past right. Now, what about everyone's favourite family, D-Team? Absolutely nothing. D-Team gets zero closure. They get no epilogue files of their own, and aren't referenced in the files of C and Q Team. I'm uncertain if the lack of closure on the only characters to receive any development in ZTD was some sort of high-level creative decision that I'm too inexperienced to understand, but I'm not happy about it. After all D-Team had to endure, they equally deserve the closure the others received.
You don't have to say anything. This is enough for now.
Which brings me to the end of my incessant rambling. Zero Time Dilemma is not a bad game by any means. I'd even call it a good game with some great moments.
Maybe you've heard of it. That virus. Radical 6.
However, ZTD's story and how it unfolds does not meet the standards set by its predecessors. And truthfully, 999 and VLR can be partly blamed for setting the standards so high. The story is awfully rushed, inconclusive, and quite meaningless for the most part. It's also presented in a confusing format that forbids the player from emotionally connecting with the characters and the challenges they face.
What the hell are you doing in there?
Cutting my next album? What do you think I'm doing?
It also fails as a sequel and the final game to the trilogy by not providing any closure.
I have to start over from the beginning.
Instead, it introduces a plot point at the last minute that undermines the efforts and creative direction of its predecessors. It's a shame and still pains me to this day because 999 and VLR truly set up Zero Time Dilemma to potentially have one of the greatest stories in video game history.
The story does not end there, however.
Perhaps we, as fans, expected too much from Zero Time Dilemma. The situation with its hiatus and the conditions that must have been in place for Zero Escape 3 to become a reality would have never allowed for this game to be able to meet the unprecedented expectations from its fanbase. Perhaps out there is a timeline where Zero Time Dilemma was made with the budget of a AAA first-party title, with Uchikoshi allowed the time and creative freedom to develop the story in its intended way. But, unfortunately for us,
we might be in the history God abandoned.
If you have made it this far into the video, please accept my thanks for tuning in and listening to me ramble. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, it would mean a lot to me if you could like the video and subscribe to my channel. But more importantly, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Zero Time Dilemma in the comments. If you disagreed with any part of my analysis, leave a comment and I look forward to a friendly debate. Thank you.